serious decision making. And before we start, Charlie, would you open our meeting for us? You don't have to do one of them, you can do a Parawera one.
Oh, cool. Me kata kia tātou, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kia uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. I aki ana te atukura he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti he mauru. Kia rā.
Charlie, you could become a regular. Okay, and so apologies, we have none. So that's excellent. Notices, just a couple of things. Seating arrangements. You don't have to sit where you've been allocated. So you can talk amongst yourselves and decide where you're going to sit. Although this is quite good because I've got everyone in eye. Sometimes miss Neil, but you know he's.
Oh, you can't miss Neil.
You know.
It's not possible.
So just I'll make that comment that you can actually move the seating around, but it's quite nice if you sit in the same spot once you have decided. The other notice is you have the agenda in front of you, but I want to change it because items 7, 8 and 9, I feel that as councillors we should go through a discussion on all those things outside the eye of the public. And the reason for that is that it gives you a chance to speak your mind. You might have some different views on who should go on different committees, and that sort of debate is best held so that you can, in an environment where you feel free and able to speak your mind. So we are going to, once we've done item 5 and 6, finished item 5 and 6, we will break for perhaps an hour and decide who wants to go on these various committees and who we think should go on these various committees. Is everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. So, confirmation,
Conflict of interest?
yeah, yes, no, I just was going to whether any notices. Okay, any conflict of interests? Now, just for our new councillors, of which you are 6, you would have been asked to fill out a conflict of interest list, and hopefully you've all completed that. So once you've done that, unless there's a change, you can we have this every day because every time we meet, but it's only in reference to something that's on the agenda. So hopefully you have all completed that. So are there no conflict of interest on the agenda for items on the agenda today? There are none. We'll move on. Confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting, which was essentially the swearing in, election of chair, election of deputy chair, and the setting of the next meeting, which is today. So do we have a mover on those minutes? Thanks, Hanawai. Seconder, Neil? Second. All those in favour of confirming those minutes? Aye. That passed unanimously. Okay, so let's go to item 5, adoption.
What about item 4?
Oh, gee whiz, item 4. Call for minor items not on the agenda.
I have 2.
Thank you, Rick. What are they?
Otiti.
Motiti.
Motiti, that was one of mine too. You flogged my one.
No, it wasn't yours. I got there first.
Oh.
Otiti. Firewood.
Okay, righto. Neil?
Fireworks.
You have one, Neil?
No.
You're not going to follow on the Motiti one?
Well, it's already been grievously flogged by...
I thought grievous was a word too, but...
You snooze, you lose. Let's move on.
Any other minor items? There we have 2, Motiti and firewood, presumably green firewood. Okay, I just want to...
Before we move on, Chair, could I just raise a point of order?
Oh, that's the first one for the year. You can.
Well, it's not really order, but I've spent a frustrating number of hours last night going through the material on here, and I find the software package and the system we've given for managing the council information less than satisfactory. It's a significant step backwards on the system we had previously. I don't know how this has come about. But when I had, for example, looking at some of the longer documents which are in standing orders and the code of conduct, I'd get to the end and want to go back to the front. And when I scrolled through it, it was just blank pages. It took a long time for the machine to catch up with where I was. It's not very often I outrun a computer, but I did on this occasion. I had enough time to go and get a cup of tea and come back, and then finally it populated the things. This is incredibly slow. It doesn't allow you to jump from page number to another page number easily. It's counterintuitive. The third thing I found with it was when I was writing on it, using the pen and tap and do the write, sometimes it wouldn't show. So you tap and go again and again and again. And then finally, the brain in this thing would click up and I'd have multiple marks. And it would seem if you had a psychologist looking at this, you'd say this boy's got some terrible psychological problems. There's all these sort of angry, scratchy marks on it. The fourth thing I found on this is that when I wrote on it, marks I put on disappeared. Sometimes in whole, and sometimes in part. So I'm not going to be able to work with this thing if it's going to behave like this. The other thing I'd say to you is that we have a new environment today. We talk about customer focus, we talk about victim-centred justice and those things. And here we are. What consultation do we have about the style of technology we're given? I'd have liked to have had some opportunity to have a look at it and see if it's fit for purpose. I hope we haven't paid the bill for this. If we have, I think you should fish it out of the system quick, because this is a backward step of where we were before. I'm sorry to say it, but I have to tell you how I think.
Thank you, Rick. And it's noted there have been a few murmurs from other councillors on this as well. Not including myself, because I put it down to personal incompetence, but clearly I can be assisted. That it's not all my fault. So we'll just note it and let's have a look.
We'll have a talk to the IT people at lunchtime and see if we can get this thing fixed.
Okay.
I'm just not prepared to sit here for 10 minutes and wait for the machine to catch up where I'm at.
Right, let's move on. I think your message was clearly received, Councillor. Item 5, adoption of the standing orders. James, you or Jess, is he speak to this?
I can speak to this one. We traversed this reasonably well last week. The standing orders are based on the recommended template from Local Government New Zealand, as we described last week. The two principal matters which were raised last week was the question of discussed was the question of establishing a quorum when we have members attending by audio-video link, and so that's just been clarified in the paper that we can't deviate from what's set out in the Local Government Act, so quorum will still require the physical presence of councillors for counting quorum. Then the other issue which we undertook to go away and give some thought to and have come back with a suggestion on is how we deal with the situation of a councillor who provides apologies for their absence but is unwell or unable to perform their duties on an extended basis, and unfortunately the Act is clear about what happens in the event of a member passing away, but there is ambiguity about what happens in the event that somebody has an extended illness. They're still alive and well not well, but alive and unable to perform their duties. Theoretically, they could tender their apologies for meetings for the remainder of the triennium, and then the onus then goes on the chair, really, I guess, about whether you accept those apologies or not. Because if you don't grant leave of absence that is sought, and it is my reading that the chair is not under any obligation actually to do that, but it does put you in a difficult position of exercising judgment. So what's proposed here is that in the event that somebody becomes incapacitated for an extended period, like Mayor Bill Dalton was, that there would be consultation with the individual and or their family after 4 meetings have not been attended, and then by matter of judgment really there would be a determination that their return to duties is not imminent, because one could imagine that somebody has a period of treatment for a serious illness that might run for something like 3 months, and so we might have a view that because they are going to return to duty, or that there is a reasonable prospect of returning to duty in the foreseeable future, that we might want to be flexible around the 4 meetings. So it might be 6 meetings, for example. But
Well, Bill's case is the live example.
that's right, and so given that there was no prospect of Bill returning to his duties for the remainder of the triennium, but that he's still living amongst us, then somebody needed to make that call. And so what's proposed here is that a council resolution would therefore need to be made following due consultation. So it's a proposal, and obviously over to council whether or not that's the approach you'd like to take.
Okay, questions and even thoughts on that? Craig, you first, and then
I'm just surprised. Is there no guidance from state services? You know, it can't have been the first time this has occurred across the state sector, so there's no guidance or precedent in there?
There's none we've been able to discover. So, I think normally what happens under such circumstances is that people probably resign of their own volition, and so there's not a decision that's kind of forced upon council. So that's probably the unusual situation when there isn't a voluntary resignation and the council's sort of hand is forced.
just a clarification, Napier did, in that case, did seek counsel from, advice from state services, and they got answer. Yeah. Martin?
Oh, no, I've got comments on other aspects, but not on that.
Okay.
Happy with that.
Both as well, but I'll just comment on that. This is normally dealt with in a normal employment relations situation by a person having sick leave. And when you've used your sick leave, then you are expected to return to work. And if you're unable to undertake your duties, you're vacated the position. What I find interesting here is that we're proposing to give someone 4 months sick leave without question, because you're a counsellor, which is significantly different to what we would treat our ordinary staff with. I would doubt anybody would have 4 months guaranteed sick leave here. So that's where I find the contradiction. We are, in fact, looking to treat counsellors different. Harsh, I know this may sound to others, but from our staff. And I have a difficulty with that.
So look, I would say we're not proposing to grant 4 months sick leave. The Act allows for a member to tender their apologies for 4 consecutive meetings and not vacate their office. So it's the Act that provides for that. There's obviously the question of whether we're also going to count council committee meetings as well as the council meetings, which might shorten the period.
That's the thing that I think is a fault in here. I was going to come to later. It says council meetings, just meetings. So how's the count done? I just thought it was a glaring error in this.
So the count on a strict interpretation would be council meetings. So it would be the monthly meeting, and so
I think the standing order should say
define that. Yep.
just say instead of meeting, monthly council meetings, 4 monthly council meetings.
Sure. If that provides clarity, then no problem. But look, going back to the substantive point you make, councillor, it's the Act that enables somebody to tender apologies for 4 consecutive meetings before their position becomes vacated. So that's not a question of policy by council. That is a fact of legislation, and there will be occasions when people have perfectly legitimate reasons why they can't attend several meetings in a row, and I think the number 4 has been struck on the basis that there are normal circumstances that might preclude somebody to miss a couple of meetings in a row. 3 starting to become, I guess, an issue. And then once you get to 4,
You've got a problem.
certainly that's the way the Act has determined it.
Martin,
Okay.
we will take your other issue.
Thank you. Well, look, just on that, and then I'll get to the other issues. I note that the definition of meeting includes all of our meetings, first inaugural, ordinary, extraordinary, but also committee, subcommittee, and other body meetings convened under the, so meetings would include all of that, just for that. Look, I don't know whether this is the best forum, Mr. Chairman, but there are 7 points that I've got that are at a relatively detailed level, some more substantive than others, and if I could perhaps just give you a flavour of a couple of them. There are cross-references to appendices which are incorrect, which I could just simply raise with Leanne. I just wanted to highlight that there are a couple of aspects of the standing orders which underscore the importance of ensuring our terms of reference are appropriate, because, for example, under 9.2 you can only receive reports within the scope of a specific delegation as a committee, and there are other aspects of the code which include, are defined by the terms of reference, for example, clause 9.6 as to the reports which the chair can request. So just a flag that we get that right when we get to that point. 19.3 I think has been revised regarding the casting vote provision, but I think it's gone too far inadvertently. The chairperson or any other person presiding at a meeting should say does have or has a deliberative vote,
Exactly right.
but doesn't have a casting vote. So that's just taken both of them out. So I think that should read: the chairperson or any other person presiding at the meeting has a deliberative vote, and in the case of a vote, has no casting vote. So that was that.
Leanne, you chopped the voting down to the council vote to 8.
There are some curios in here. I'd have to say that the decision-making options in clause 22, option A, B and C, option A I think is clunky, but is the preferred option, and I'd be interested in the merits of its operation from the experience of those who've been on the council before, and perhaps James. But in essence, it adopts 3 tests whereby if you've moved a motion or seconded it, you can't move or second an amendment, which effectively means it might have been your proposal or something that you're really keen on, but as the discussion evolves around the table, you're effectively precluded from adapting to that, and you'd be reliant on someone who's sort of thinking in the same area or on the same topic. Whereas the option B, and if you've spoken to a motion, you can't move an amendment. And I'm sort of thinking, well, what's the merit of that? Do you keep your powder dry and wait till everyone else goes, and then hope there's no closure motion? And so I'm interested in the merits of option A being the default. That's question 1. That the second option is not quite as clunky, if I can put it that way, or perhaps pedantic would be another way. But if you lose an amendment, you can't move a further amendment. So it's kind of get your amendments right. And I can see a certain logic in that if you want to bring discussion to a head and close, that people can't keep on sort of chipping away and getting the motion better. I understand that. That's possibly more preferred, but I would have thought a better default. And then we can, if we're wanting to have a really good chin wag about something, we could all agree to go to option C, which is anyone can make motions and amend motions and speak and all that sort of thing. So I just wanted to highlight that, but equally, none of those, the flowcharts don't match the options. So the flowcharts need a bit of panel beating as well. So I spent about 2 hours staring at that, and I've got some notes on that, which I won't trouble the committee with, but I could very happily raise with Leanne or James offline. A couple of other things. I'm interested in this issue of closure motions, where under 25.1 you can only move a closure motion if you hadn't participated in the debate. So you've got to sit there silent, and if you get to the point where 2 people have spoken, you can say, I move to close the motion, put it to a vote, but not if you've spoken on it. And I'm just wondering what the logic behind that is. There may be a logic.
Was there logic?
Good. Perhaps we could hear about that. A couple of other things. Appendix 8, the powers of the chair, has reference to the casting vote again, which needs to be amended. Appendix 1, which is the legislation upon which we may move into committee, omits by some curious reason within clause F, free and frank expression of opinions as a ground for refusing or for moving into committee.
I can clarify that. That is not covered in the Goima. It's specifically eliminated from the reasons why you can go into public excluded.
But it is okay, so it's a reason why
you can withhold information,
thank
but
you.
it's not a reason you can go into public
It's a shame because I
excluded.
mean that you know, sometimes moving into committee so that we can really get to the core of something might have been a useful exercise, but I guess that's what workshops are for. I only had a couple of other things. Appendix A, clause 23.8, this is quite a technical point, but it assumes that where an amendment is lost, the meeting will resume the debate on the original motion. Any member who has not spoken to that motion may speak to it and may move or second a further amendment. That is effectively codifying option A and locking in option A. So if we were to adopt B as a default, then I think we'd need to, or if we were moving into C as an operating mode, you know, we'd have to make 23.8 subject to that. So I know some of those sounded pedantic, but I want, you know, if we want to get the rules of the game right from the outset, I think it's important that we do that now. We can change these later by a 75% vote, I think, or suspend them, but those are some of the comments I had on aspects of the detail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Thank you. I'm interested, is option C your favour?
I think option B would be, because it stops people continually chipping away with amendments at their motion. If they, you know, heard some things, we move an amendment and it doesn't work, you know, we need to close, I guess, or put them, you know, put it to a vote. But I would have thought between B and C, you've got most bases covered, whereas option A is just a bit clunky.
You generally live with C.
I don't like any of them. Seriously.
What have you run?
Seriously,
Well, generally it's we've used C really.
well,
So it's been pretty open as people, because otherwise you do stifle debate and someone can't speak again, and people don't like that.
it's been used to shut down debate.
It's been used to shut
I've got
down
a whole
debate.
pile of things in here, and I just want to start by asking, why didn't we put up as the option the standing orders we had for the last triennium? Why do we have to turn them over every time? Why is the default to change them? I don't understand this.
You don't have to change them. It
But-
was the only reason we put forward the new ones was because it was supposedly updated to clarify a couple of things.
Well, they're not the worst.
So that is an option. Don't just go with what we were using already.
And I've got a pile of things here. So I just think, personally, I think good practice is you only change what you're doing if there's good and just reason for it, not for the sake of it. This seems to me to be a change just for the sake of it.
Well, no, I think LGNZ have gone to the trouble of updating them based on changes in legislation, changes in practice, and have provided an enhanced set for consideration. And look, I guess in hindsight we could have given you the previous trienniums as well as those to consider.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's just the start of my thing. Is I just feel we had something which worked. We're all reasonably familiar with. We should have just stayed with that.
Well, 3 councillors are familiar with it.
Yeah, well, that's right. But if we hadn't have had as many councillors change, we were still looking to change. I'm thinking of the way in which this council conducts its business. That's what I'm testing here, James. The other thing too is that I was interested in the definitions. See, I see that we have a definition for karakia. We don't have a definition for prayer. I found these things were written with, I read this stuff here, I thought it was cultural cringe. So it's wrong to define words in one language but not in another.
One assumes that the drafter of these standing orders felt that the common understanding of prayer in the English language was probably relatively universal, and karakia might be a concept that's not universally understood.
I understand that, but the point is as a principal position, you should treat both languages equally. And if you're going to have a definition in Māori, you should have a definition in English.
Well, I guess that becomes problematic because we'd have definitions in Māori for all of the concepts set out.
But
and
therefore you don't have a
then we
definition.
basically
I think, look, we're going to move on here. One thing for certain, we need standing orders that do not stifle debate and cannot be manipulated and used by people just to do that. And we haven't done that in the last triennium, and one of the things about this council is that we have had really good debate and got through issues, and everyone's left the meeting feeling that they've had their say, and we definitely don't want to stifle that. That's why I would go for, if it is a combination of option B and C, C is much more attractive to me, that's for certain.
Well, I thought the better option actually was, when we've been at our best, we have had a general debate before you've sought, as the chair, a resolution.
That's right.
And we don't provide for that there. So I would have thought, these are our standing orders, no one else's. We should write them in terms of how we wish them to be. And I would have thought that we should provide for the chair, at the discretion of the chair, a general debate on issues. Then the chair would either move or call for a
That's
resolution.
what we've done, yeah.
And then, having done that, take any amendment. See, it here precludes, well, it's written here as an amendment, can only be moved after the second one. The chairman should call for any amendments, so people can put all their amendments on the deck and everybody can see it, and then the chair will choose the order in which the amendments are dealt with. And what's normal is that the chair deals with either the amendment that came in first or the most radical to the least radical. And you take the most radical to the least radical, so if someone moves, we spend 100 million, someone moves 70 million, someone moves 60 million, well then you start at the most radical to come down till you find where the balance is of the meeting. So everybody can see it. And I also think we should have it written that it's one of the things we've had the standing orders shut us down before by, is that if you've spoken on a part of the amendment, you can't speak somewhere else. So everybody should be able to speak to each motion, whether it be a motion or an amendment. So if Will moves an amendment, moves a motion, and Craig seconds it, then someone else moves an amendment. We should all be able to have a go at the amendment, you with me? So each part of it, everybody should be able to participate.
That's what we have done.
That's what we've done, but it's not written that way. And I think we should write the standing orders to suit ourselves. That's how we deal with it, and I think it works really well. I found these things to be really clunky, actually. I would prefer myself for us to. I see that I'm now joined by someone else who's interested in the standing orders, which is a novel first for me. And I would suggest.
Would you happily sit down with
Martin?
And
I think we should. I would love us to write a set of standing orders which suit this regional council. There's lots of things in here which are irrelevant to us, and a set of standing orders that people, when they turn up here, can read and follow.
Martin, would you be happy to do that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can I just qualify that with there are aspects of these standing orders that we don't have discretion over, but I
That's
certainly
right.
agree with the principle that where we do, we make them work for Hawke's Bay Regional Council that we've got here. I would note that the way I read it under any of these options, members can speak to any amendment, whether what they can't do is move or, propose further amendments, but it is clunky. So, yeah, no, I'd be happy to be part of that if that was helpful. What I'd really like to see, though, is perhaps a track change of what this is compared with the previous. If there is a preference for the previous, what is it other than the points that have been track changed that we've seen that's changed? And that would give us a starting point of, if Councillor Barker was happy with the starting point, we could start with what's changed and then take it from there.
I would be happily to give you for suggestion that for this purpose of this meeting, we adopt the standing orders of the previous council, and that Martin and I, and anybody else who's interested, come back to the first meeting of council in the 2020 with a draft proposed standing orders.
I would suggest that that's a good idea too. Does anyone got any thoughts on that? So today we adopt the previous standing orders and then we form a little group. Anyone who's interested, they go away for the month and they work these ones into those that will be suitable to us and bring them back to us.
I'd be happy with that, Mr. Chairman. Can I just understand, though, how radically different are the ones that we're adopting on an interim basis from what I see in front of me now?
Not radical at all.
C.
Basically, around that decision-making pathway.
And to be fair to you, Martin, the chair has willfully and helpfully ignored them when it's suited.
Absolutely.
Fine, we can all do that by agreement anyway.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, you do need to go back to people, you know. You cannot have people leave this room thinking they haven't been heard. And that happened in the first 3 years of me being in the council. And it created deep bitterness and deep divide.
Okay.
So we do need something that is common sense and sensible. So, Rick, will you move that we do that? We adopt
move that.
Oh,
we do need-
Leanne was going to
Can I
speak to my
just-
question.
Sorry, Chair, with one exception, can we add the provisions for emergency meetings, which was an update to the legislation, to the current standing orders?
But if it's in the legislation, it applies. If it's legislated for, legislation overarches standing orders.
Fine, but is it all right if I just include it, though?
All right, you must do it.
Are they otherwise pretty similar apart from what we've seen in track changes?
Yes.
Thank you, that's great. In that
Okay.
case, I'm very happy with
Rick, will you move that we do that?
I move that. I move we adopt
Martin,
the.
will you second that. Get your, sorry, I interrupted you there.
That's right.
You're moving that we adopt the
Previous council, standing orders from the previous triennium, and that councillors Barker and Williamson, any other interested councillor, contemplate a set of draft standing orders suitable specifically to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and bring that draft back to the first meeting of council in the 2020 year.
second by Martin, and we don't need to speak to it anymore, I don't think. Is there any discussion on that? Is everyone happy that we do that? Okay.
Chair, the only thing I'd suggest is that I would have thought the next meeting in a month's time would be soon enough to
Yeah.
bring it back as opposed to next year. But
No, next
Or
week.
I did. Give us a chance to have a break. It's quite a bit of work, actually. I've done this before. It is quite a bit of work. Make no mistake about it.
Now, is there anyone, before I just move it, is there anyone else who would like to be involved in that, or we just leave it to those two people?
I'd be interested, but not at the detailed level, but it's more, obviously I don't know what the standing orders were previously, and I just, take you as you were, council seemed to run pretty smoothly under the previous operation. But as you noted, Mr. Chair, it actually comes down to the people around the table and the chair, the spirit of
That's
discussion and respect and debate.
Absolutely.
So, and yes, it's a backstop, but I take on board, so I'm quite comfortable, particularly what we've heard from Mr. Williams, Councillor Williams, he's got stuck into it, boots and all, and so I look forward to their recommendations and more than open for comment, but not directly involved.
Okay, Jeremy?
Definitely would like to see the previous set into our system so we actually can read it for ourselves,
we'll make sure
and so that we actually can apply it.
Okay, we'll make sure that. Okay, all in favour?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimously passed, and we look forward to. There's a lot of work. There's going to be a lot of work, guys. So you probably won't get back before Christmas. But if you could circulate your thinking and ideas just when you meet other councillors, I think that would be a really good idea too. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to item 6, which is the adoption of the Code of Conduct for elected members. Is this the same as the previous one, James?
probably the most significant change is that we've just dropped out the social media element of the policy, which council has expressed some concern about last week in our workshop discussion. Otherwise, it's essentially the same that was presented previously. Builds off the LGZ template, which is very similar to the previous Code of Conduct.
It is different from our previous Code of Conduct?
Yes, there are some minor changes.
There's language which we had quite a strenuous discussion about, which is gone.
Correct.
Why is that gone?
In relation to the social media piece?
No, the other parts of the code of conduct. There are some significant differences in this. It doesn't matter because
Is there a particular...
I just remember.
concern?
I remember things that we had discussions about arising out of the code of conduct for the first 3 years that we're here. We made some changes, quite heated discussions about it, and the language is now different. It's gone. So again, I come back to the point: why do we simply make a change for no reason?
Leanne, have you got any commentary on the substantiveness of the changes?
Sorry, not about the, through you, Mr. Chair, not about the changes from the last code of conduct to this code of conduct, but the previous code of conduct. So the one from 6 years ago did have substantial rework of the complaints process in particular. With the incoming 2016 council, they adopted the updated, rewritten code of conduct recommended by the LGNZ, and that is the one that, in effect, for the last triennium, which has just been updated with those few minor changes proposed for this triennium.
Well, just to cut the agony short, I'm not going to oppose these. I just think this is, having been through 2 or 3 reviews now of the code of conduct, it's basically, in my view, is ineffectual. The standard of behaviour around this council is given by councillors. We will make things work or not work. This here is ineffectual, and some parts of it, in my view, are simply plain wrong. It also has, in my view, I could go back in tones of LGNZ shaking the finger at ordinary councillors by setting out what they think we should do and behave, and I resent that. But I just take you to page 71, and this goes right into the heart of politics here. And see that it says in here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line up from the bottom of the page, as a dot point: do not undermine council policy or bring council into dispute. So if you undermine council policy, you're in breach of the code of conduct. Well, that strikes directly at the heart of politics. See, you could have a majority of councillors who have decided on a position, and they, as a majority, are exercising that. And a councillor, or 2, or 3, or maybe even 4, who oppose that, therefore set to undermine the policy because they are politically opposed to it. According to this, those people would be in breach of the code of conduct. Now, I'm sure no one around this table would take that point because we believe in democracy and having an open and free debate. But this here is a bullet point to shut that down. Just understand that. As written, in my view, from a point of view of people who like things to be all nice and orderly and we have a nice team game here. But life ain't like that. The other thing that I thought about, but the things, and I'll be interested in Martin's point on this, 12.1, it writes about the natural justice. I've worked in this area and know the rules of natural justice pretty well. It's common law, it's not statute law, and whoever wrote this has got it wrong, in my view, completely wrong. They've not understood what it is, and there are several glaring deficiencies in this, and I just think it's, I don't understand. Local government in New Zealand have gone through this. What the process of reviewing this is, what level of review to that, but the quality control, in my view, is really poor. The second thing is on 2.2. So if we, the other thing is, James, do you understand that this code of conduct applies to you as the Chief Executive? I thought not, but the way this is written, it seems to imply it does.
Well, there's many provisions within the Code of Conduct that place obligations on me, so to that extent, yes.
Okay. Well, the other thing too is that I just was curious here, and when the complaint's received, it's to the chief executive, and if must forward the complaint to the chair, and where the chair is the party to the complaint, an independent investigator. What I was surprised at, if it was a code of conduct inquiry against the chair, why it wasn't referred to the deputy chair?
Well, that's a perfectly.
But a point I'm making is that it sees an external process as being the only thing. So anyway, I think that's wrong as well. I could go through and nitpick some other things, but I'm going to vote for these things, but I don't like them. I think they're poorly written, badly thought through, too long, too wordy, and the code of conduct should be just like when you come to a place there, no hats, no work boots, no singlets, excuse me, clear basic points about what it is. So when people read it, they understand what it is. You get lost in the mire of all sorts of hectoring, lecturing, and other stuff that's in here. Badly written. But I'll vote for it. We'll vote for ideas.
Rick,
Just to get on with it.
I am quite concerned personally about that point that you raised, that if it's a 5-4 vote, and we've actually been down there.
Yeah, you take the point of
And that the councillors aren't able to, for instance, if it was a 5-4 vote that we opposed global warming, as an extreme example, that the 4 other councillors are having to breach the code of conduct by going out and saying that they actually think that it's wrong.
Well, you spent 3 years undermining a council policy, actually.
That's right.
So, Chair, look,
I'm a Scottish borderer, and code of conduct didn't mean much to us back then.
Chairman, can I
Yes, mate.
speak to this? I actually was broadly happy with the Code of Conduct. I had no specific comments on it. I think it is about the spirit of it. I have a slightly different view than Councillor Barker about the way I think a council should operate. I don't believe this is Wellington. I don't believe this is the place for that type of politics. I think we are not the parliament as such. We are more in the nature of a government. And the point I would say is that I think there's a difference between saying I disagreed with that policy that was adopted at a particular meeting and undermining it. And I think to undermine a policy would be to go out and actively do something which meant that the policy couldn't was defeated. Now, if you took an issue to an election and won, that meant something that had been, that was council policy no longer, that's not undermining the policy, that's called democracy. But during the term of the government, I don't think this hamstrings you from saying that you disagreed and that your personal views are in relation to that policy as expressed at the meeting when you expressed them. But then it is a step further. That word undermine to me is quite a strong one. But I'm happy for it to be, I guess, we could put some attention on what that actually means and be more specific about that. The ability for members to express their views regarding a decision that they vote against. I think undermining is a different thing. So I was broadly happy with it. I thought the natural justice aspect was reasonably okay. It's probably not precise, but this is going to be more in the spirit than the letter. And that's all I really wanted to say. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, I've just got some reservations about constraints around this term undermining policy position of council, and your example, or Councillor Barker's example of climate change is a good one. And if this council came to a decision to suggest that climate change wasn't an issue and wasn't going to do anything about it, and if a number of councillors decided to actively participate in protest, criticism, holding meetings to put an alternative view that climate change deserved attention and council are living in caves or something like that, would that be regarded as undermining policy? I would hazard a guess that it would, in fact would. So it worries me a little that there is this potential within the code to somehow censure councillors in that situation. I can certainly see other situations where there could be an active undermining of the council's position, which would be detrimental. But where is that boundary? That's what worries me in the extent of the code of conduct.
Chair, sorry.
Can I just, I'm just sort of thinking along the lines of undermining, or might be something like walking out of the room and removing the quorum.
It's happened.
I know it's happened in the, I've seen it in the newspaper. Is that something that would fit that bill?
The eye of the viewer, really. And the point that Martin makes, you can, which I disagree. So you can go and say that I'm against it. That gives you a single act. Undermining is, in my view, is a series of acts. And so if it's to be just the right to say I'm against it, and why, when you're limiting a person's political activity. In one period, there was a group in this council organised a series of meetings, public meetings, on the topic, simply to mobilise public opinion about things, to put pressure on. That was undermining, in my view, no question about it. But it was politics. So I just think undermine. I think it just takes it a step too far, in my view. You know, you have the right to campaign. I just think it's. But again, I'm not going to blue about it, because I just think that the people around this room are going to be sensible about it. But fundamentally, I think it's wrong.
Okay, the recommendation is that we receive and note the adoption of the Code of Conduct for all elected representative staff. The report is given by staff. Should we just move that and get on with it?
Well, Chair, given the extensive reservations that have been expressed, particularly about the provisions on page 71 of the meeting papers, and given that we're going to have standing orders come back, I suggest that possibly we do make some changes here, and I think I think it would be helpful to clarify the fact that the differing views of councillors on any given matter do need the space to be expressed safely, but I also do think that we could provide some guidance around the extent to which the undermining concept does become problematic, as Councillor Williams has pointed out. And I just want to make a slight plea here for the staff of the organisation, just so councillors are cognisant of the need to exercise some care and judgment around that. And I'll give the example of the fact that we've got over 300 farms going on to resource consent to farm in Central Hawke's Bay, which is highly controversial with many of the landowners down there. And I think it's perfectly fine for councillors to express a view that they might not have agreed with that policy, but it becomes very difficult for our staff on the ground in administering consents and undertaking compliance work if there is an active narrative coming from councillors that the policy is inappropriate, is wrong-headed, etc. And so there's a difficult balance to strike in expressing the diversity of views around the table without not creating an impossible situation for the staff of the organisation on an ongoing basis around things which might be controversial. So I'd be quite keen to have a look at the wording here and see whether we can come up with something that provides a bit more comfort around the democratic process, but also does remind members of the need to take some care and exercise some caution.
So we're happy with that?
Could I just add, I think Jameson made a really good point, and I think that's the time for a mature conversation about this. But on the other side of it, I'm mindful of the situation over the road, where the code of conduct was being used as a tool to bludgeon people into silence on a position which the deep state held. So it can't be used as a political tool. And I'm not going to agree to that. So you're quite right, we've got to find, it can't be open slather, say what you like, do what you like, but it has to be a balance, so I'm sure with a bit of thought we'll find that balance.
Okay, if everyone's in agreement with that, we'll leave this paper on the table and bring it back to come back. Given the discussion that we've had.
And while you're looking at that, I also think you should have a look at the chair, deputy chair thing.
And the bits that the CEO is caught by or operates under, because I'm not sure if you're caught, but, you know, the item we've been talking about, if the CEO, with your various representations of the council out and about, is captured or not. I'm quite interested in that, and actually just why I do it, I actually very much agree with Mr. Barker on his points about democracy, and I'm actually close to taking offence on your example of the, which is what going on, absolutely respect the challenge of the 300 consent issues, but actually at the end of the day, you know, councillors are making their decisions as elected councillors with respect to process and the staff that operate under them. So that, with a capital B, that word balance and constructive working together to find solutions, I think is the way through, as opposed to any hint of the executive or the council trying to close people down who there are expectations of them to voice concerns from their constituency.
Sure.
Just one further comment. I think it goes back to your point, Mr. Chairman, on the standing orders, that if we have fulsome discussion and debate and we don't get in positions where, for example, a casting vote is needing to be exercised, we actually re-debate and adjourn if we need to get consensus. We're not hopefully going to be in a position where we're challenging this policy, but I hear everything that's been said. I just believe that we need, once we've made a decision democratically, we need to live within that decision as best we can. So I'm kind of coming from the other end of it a little bit, and I fully support the idea that we perhaps tease out where the limits of those two perhaps competing concerns should best land.
Okay, do we have a mover that we leave this paper on the table and James will bring it back to us, given the discussions? Craig?
Second.
And yours
Craig.
second. Okay, all those in favour of that? We don't need to speak on it, do we?
I'd just like to add, given James's ability with a pen, I'd have thought there's 2 or 3 chunks of this that you would take, for example, the values, a couple of other bits and pieces, and you could, if you decided to, write a couple of paragraphs which would set the tone for how we should conduct it rather than all the rest of it. I just think it gets the essence of this. You get lost reading this thing. If you give it to a new councillor, you're reading for hours to try and find it, but there is an essence in here which is respectful, etc., you know, politics, balance, recognition of staff, you know, the way in which the things, but we could write in about 10 sentences what we want, in my view.
Craig, do you wish to add to that as Singda? Add anything?
No, let's let it rest on the table with reference to my earlier comments.
Okay, is there anyone else wish to add to anything? Otherwise we'll move to leave it on the table. Those in favour? Aye. Against? We're doing that. Okay, so I want to adjourn the meeting because I do feel, and welcome to our visitors today too, welcome Pauline. We have some, just for the sake of our visitors and those people watching, we have 3 items that I'm really keen that councillors thrash out amongst themselves because they, you know, and feel free to speak their mind without being judged. So I do want to move to a council-only session to go over these committee reports, and these committee make-ups, so that we can come to the solution that we all agree with and be able to speak freely. So I need someone to move, do I?
No, you can just adjourn.
Oh, we just adjourn the meeting. So we will adjourn the meeting, and I think 10:45 we should be, I don't know, 11 o'clock I would have thought.
11 o'clock?
11 o'clock.
So you're exercising the brutal power of the chair, are you?
Yeah.
So, sorry, Chair, just to complicate matters, we have invited staff to join us at 11:15 for a short celebration around the
Oh, that's
30th
fine. We'll be
30th
finished
anniversary. Well, by 11.
Yep. I'm adjourning till 11 o'clock.
And
Sorry, but if you're reconvening the meeting at 11,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that we then would need another adjournment at 11:15.
Oh, do you need another?
We've invited the staff to come in at 11:15 on the basis that
30 years. But can't they come to the meeting?
well, they're certainly coming in here, but it will be disrupting the meeting, that's all.
That's all right.
Bring a birthday cake in for the 30th birthday of this organisation, so.
You don't think the public will want to see that?
Well, no, absolutely. We just had anticipated that to be probably a time for morning tea. So I'm just wondering whether 10:45 would be better. That would give you half an hour to then try and move through the business.
We should be able to do it. 10:45 then.
Okay.
45 minutes. Thank you, everybody.